All right, everyone, welcome to our live panel with instructors from most of the major methods. We are so excited to have you all here with us. My name is Ellen. I am going to be moderating this panel. And now I'm going to introduce you to who we have on here. So we have Mary Bruno, who's going to be representing the Creighton model. We have Kelly Donahue, who's going to be representing SymptoPro, which is a symptothermal method. We have Melissa Buchan here, who is representing ChartNeo. We have Mairead Sufhoff. Oh no, I forgot to ask how you pronounce your last name. Mairead is representing FAbM. We have Theresa Sullivan here, who is representing Marquette. We have Christina Valenzuela here, who is representing Boston Crosscheck. And we have Kristen Putnam here, who is representing Billings. So we have so many people on this panel, and I am so excited. So if you are tuning in and if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So if you're looking at your page, it should be on the right-hand side of that or towards the bottom of the live stream. So please feel free to put questions in the chat. But to get started, we're going to go ahead and have everybody tell us the biomarkers that your method uses. So we'll start with Mary with Creighton. Can you tell us about the biomarkers that Creighton uses?
Yeah, so Creighton is a mucus-only system. So mucus is the only biomarker that we're looking at specifically for fertility, but we are also looking at biomarkers for health. So we consider like any unusual bleeding to be a biomarker, the length of the luteal phase or the post-peak phase is a biomarker, that mucus cycle, the cycle length as a whole, those are all things that we're looking at to help us understand the health of the woman.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. Kristen, can you tell us about the biomarkers that Billings uses?
Yes, Billings is also a mucus-only method, and we are looking at a lot of the same things that Mary mentioned as well. But yeah, mucus is what we look at.
Perfect. Kelly with SymptoPro.
So SymptoPro is a symptothermal method. So we chart more than one sign. And so with SymptoPro, we chart cervical mucus, vaginal sensation, and also basal body temperature.
Awesome. Mairead, can you tell us about the biomarkers that FAbM uses?
Absolutely. So FAbM is a symptohormonal method, and we focus on cervical mucus, but also incorporate LH. And they're very flexible if you want to add in things like basal body temperature or even improve progesterone strips, for instance.
Awesome. And Theresa, what does Marquette use?
So Marquette actually started off as a mucus method, but then kind of transformed into a symptohormonal method. So our primary sign right now is urinary hormone strips and the clear blue fertility monitor, but we are very flexible as well. Some people still choose to just do mucus. We have some people who also incorporate temperatures. And newly, we are doing some research with the Mira monitor and other monitors that hopefully start coming on the market.
Oh, that's exciting. And Christina, can you tell us about the biomarkers that Boston Crosscheck uses?
Sure. Boston Crosscheck has clients learn 3 primary biomarkers. We look at cervical fluid, we look at temperatures, and we look at hormone monitoring, similarly with the Clear Blue monitor. But clients are taught how to use all 3 of those, and then they can use any combination of those different signs that they want to, so they don't have to use all 3. And then we have options for LH testing and then prove progesterone strips as well.
Awesome. I hope everybody learned a lot from all those different methods. Now, I want to have Melissa tell us a little bit about ChartNeo and kind of why I left her for last.
ChartNeo is a tool. It's a charting app and web portal that is friendly to all of these methods. So it takes the elements of the top fertility awareness-based methods and it brings them all together in one place for family planning, women's health. And so what we use is all of the biomarkers mentioned. Cervical mucus is the foundation along with vaginal sensation. Basal body temperature is a cross check. And then you do have the ability to enable a calendar rule if you have situations like limited mucus. Of course, that's effective after 3 cycles of charting. And then we have a lot of options for at-home metabolite hormone monitoring as well.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. Now, I would love to hear from everyone. The next question I have on my list. And again, if you're watching and you have a question for all of the methods or for just one of the methods, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can bring it up to our experts here. So I think some of you guys kind of answered this question when we asked, but I still want to ask this question because we could just kind of go back over it, even if you already mentioned it. But does your method employ secondary or optional biomarkers? So we just want to talk a little bit about the flexibility or the additional things that you can add in to the method. So Mary, why don't you start again with Creighton?
Yeah, the Creighton, the method itself does not have other biomarkers. I never discourage my clients from using them if they want to. Sometimes they mention it, sometimes they don't, but I do think it's important that they understand if they're using LH sticks, for example, that using the LH sticks themselves is not a method. So they would have to choose a method that incorporates the protocols of those LH sticks if they want to continue charting with Creighton and have the effectiveness that they're looking for with that cross-check, then they have to understand those protocols. But yeah, the method itself is just mucus.
Perfect. Awesome. And Kristen, I feel like you're going to have a similar answer, but with Billings, can you tell us about Billings?
Right. Yeah. Billings is a mucus only method. We're looking at vaginal sensation and then the appearance of the mucus. And we do not use any other secondary biomarkers. That's it.
Awesome. Kelly with SymptoPro, what kind of secondary biomarkers does SymptoPro have?
So SymptoPro has the secondary biomarkers of intermenstrual bleeding, intermenstrual pain, and also breast tenderness. And I think it's important to understand that we call these secondary because when we interpret the chart, we don't apply any rules to them. They're simply additional biomarkers that can give you additional information about what's happening in your body when looked at in conjunction with your primary markers. But in addition to cervical mucus, vaginal sensation, and BBT, SymptoPro also has the option of teaching women how to do the cervical exam. So don't let that intimidate you. So only about 25% of women who practice SymptoPro actually do the exam. But for those who do, it really makes determining when fertility begins in the cycle during the pre-ovulatory time, it makes that much clearer for them.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. Mairead, can you tell us about optional or secondary biomarkers that FAbM has?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, FAbM primarily relies on cervical mucus and then LH, but you can incorporate BBT as a secondary biomarker. And then if you wanted to look into PROVE in addition to that, and then on top of that, they're really focusing on some of the other biomarkers that Kelly had mentioned, like looking at abnormal bleeding patterns, for instance, and any other, signs and symptoms that are coming up that are outside of their realm of normal for cervical mucus patterns.
Awesome. Theresa, can you tell us about Marquette?
Yeah, so primary is urinary hormones, but those urinary hormones that we're looking at are estrogen, LH, and then also progesterone. So the Clear Blue Monitor does the LH and the estrogen. And so we can also do additional LH tests to test with more frequency or as a substitute in some situations to the monitor. We do have several people who opt to also use PROVE so that you have an opportunity to confirm ovulation. I also do have a lot of my breastfeeding clients do also choose to monitor for temperature in those return of fertility cycles that we can just kind of benefit from a little bit more data.
Yeah, definitely. That's the zone I'm in right now. Christina, can you tell us about Boston Crosscheck?
Sure. Yeah, I already mentioned that kind of LH testing and PROVE can be used. I wanted to say as like backup to monitor or temperature things. They're looking at similar hormones. So the actual secondary sign that we would include in our instruction would be the option of internal cervical checks, including cervical positioning as a secondary sign. And as Kelly said, it's secondary because it doesn't add anything to the actual calculations for fertility, but can be a nice additional sign to look at for women who want the extra layer of confidence.
Yeah, and I am personally an instructor as well, even though I'm just moderating this panel. But in my experience with people who have opted to use internal cervix checks, they have found an incredible amount of information from just the positioning of the cervix, the softness, openness, whatever it is that they're checking for. So if if you're kind of the type of person who really likes a lot of extra information, a lot of additional data, or just like that additional check of like, oh yeah, okay, I'm seeing this too, and the rule is confirmed, that might be something you want to look into. Melissa, would you like to add anything for Chart Neo?
Everything that is mentioned, you have the ability to chart in the Chart Neo platform, with the exception of the internal cervical checks. However, there is flexibility in the notes section. It is pre-populated with the most common standardized approaches, but you can create custom tests, and then you can put in how you want to measure that. So plus or minus, or simply write a note, or you can put it in the notes. But the cool thing is it all lines up on your chart. So you have all of that information in a day, and then you can track the trend of the data that you are recording to make your informed choices. So there are a few algorithms like basal body temperature shifts. We do have an integration with the Prove, as well as temp drop. But really the important thing, which I think everybody here would agree, is that it's about being an informed consumer. So it's not an app that you're going to plug in the information. It's going to say, hey, you're ovulating today. No, it's just tracking the information, but ultimately it's up to you to work with your instructor so that you know how to interpret that information for your specific intention for charting.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. That was great. So the next question that I want to pose to all of you guys is, what is one thing or one or two things about the method that you teach that you wish people understood a little bit better? So Mary, you keep getting to be our guinea pig. So please go ahead and start.
Yeah, I think a lot of people hear that Creighton has a lot of medical benefits, but they don't understand what that means. So just to be more specific, the amount of information we're able to pick up from a Creighton chart is pretty extensive. So for example, the chart, Creighton cannot diagnose itself. The chart cannot diagnose, but it's a diagnostic tool. So we can identify, because of all the research, because of the standardization, various risk factors. For example, infertility. We can see if a woman is at high risk for being infertile long before she ever even has sex, or is even thinking about trying to get pregnant. So that's something we can try to address before she actually starts to try. Risk factors for endometriosis, PCOS, PMS, lots of times that shows up in the chart. We can see some risk factors for miscarriage, which doesn't mean that we can prevent all miscarriages by any means, but it's helpful to have that information going into it so we can prepare our bodies. And just really quickly, I thought of one more thing I wish people could understand better, and that's that you can use Creighton successfully if you have continuous mucus. So a lot of people get confused when they hear Creighton is a mucus only method. Well, I have mucus every single day on my cycle. That doesn't make sense. Now, it's not a great fit for every woman's personality because it does require extra work, but I have several clients confidently using Creighton alone with continuous mucus to avoid pregnancy. So there's just some extra special things that we have to do to help you learn.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary. Kristen, what about Billings do you wish people kind of understood better?
Sure. Well, Billings began back in 1953. And so a lot of people are like, oh, that's the old method. And it did. It started back in 1953. Doctors John and Evelyn Billings. John was a neurologist and his wife, Evelyn, was a pediatrician. And then alongside came a biophysicist and an endocrinologist that helped them with the research. And they did over 850,000 medical assays to figure out these combinations between the ovarian hormones and the cervical mucus, and that nothing really interrupts that link. And so even though research did begin a long time ago, it is continuing today, and it has been published in numerous medical journals that are peer-reviewed. The WHO has tested it all over the world, and it is used in over 65 countries that we have affiliates as well. So even though it is an older method, it is still continuing, and we are still continuing to look at how a Billings chart can help diagnose those anovulatory disorders, and that's what our doctors are working on right now.
That is awesome. Yeah. Billings, for those of you watching, you might not know that Billings is kind of the roots of like the modern methods of fertility awareness. So every method that is represented here has benefited from the research of the Billings method. Everybody's nodding their heads. Yes. Okay, Kelly, could you tell us about something about Billings? I'm sorry, SymptoPro that you wish people understood better?
Yeah, so SymptoPro is a time-intensive method to learn because we have 4 instructional sessions that are about 2 hours long. And some people think, oh my gosh, that's so much. I can't do that. What in the world am I going to learn? But after you understand how the method works, it really boils down to one rule for identifying the post-ovulatory phase. So it's a very simple method to learn and use once you understand all of the basics behind it. And if for some reason that particular rule doesn't work in a particular cycle, as instructors, we have additional rules to give you. So SymptoPro is a very personalized method, and so you're never alone when using it.
Definitely. Mairead, could you tell us about what you would like people to know better about FAbM?
Yes. So number one, I always share with people that FAbM is not, you can't learn it from using the app. So the app that they have is free for both iPhone and Android users, and it's beautiful. And if that's something that you want to use as opposed to paper charts or another alternative app, I think that's great. But a lot of people will jump on and think that they can learn the method just by using the app. And they might find, especially depending on their goals for using it and how irregular their cycles are, they might find that they will be a little bit misled because it does give you some insights into what it's seeing. And that's one of the things that I don't love about it, because it can be a little bit misleading. And especially if you're in a phase of life, maybe you're postpartum and you're waiting on a return of fertility, it might be telling you these particular things are going on and it's not entirely accurate. So I always tell people, if you want to use it, that's great. Just ignore the insights and ignore that little bit of like predictive type of response that it has. But I also love that FAbM has, similar to Creighton, they have a medical management protocol and they have physicians who are trained in medical management. So it's great because you can go through their organization and you can get support that way as well, similar to the way that you would with NAPRO physicians, which is amazing. And there is a huge need for that. So I think it's great that we have multiple organizations who are working towards that goal. And they're doing, similar things with continuing research and just kind of pushing the boundaries of women's health. And I love it.
That is fantastic. Yes, we need so much more of that. Kristen, do you want to add something in?
I did. I just wanted to chime in and say, like, as a Billings instructor, we send our clients to FAbM doctors all the time because your doctors are trained by Pilar V. Hill, which is one of our huge researchers, and we love her. So I love that you guys have that aspect because it makes our clients a lot easier to find a doctor who's using those protocols. So it's good stuff.
Fabulous. Yeah, there is a lot of, trade-off in some of these methods. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't know either. Theresa, can you tell us about Marquette and what is the one thing or couple of things about Marquette that you wish people understood better?
Absolutely. So a common misconception that people may have about Marquette is that it is the Clearblue fertility monitor. The Clearblue monitor is a very valuable tool that many of our clients use to chart their fertility. However, it's a lot more complicated than that in the sense that you can't reliably use the Clearblue monitor alone for avoiding pregnancy. If your intention is to avoid pregnancy, we do have specific rules and protocols, and that is what the Marquette method is in conjunction with whatever your instructor is adding to your particular protocol. But if somebody is self-teaching themselves NFP using the Clearblue fertility monitor without following Marquette rules taught to them by an instructor, that's not truly following the method. It's them using the Clearblue monitor, which some people may choose to do, especially if their intentions are not heavily, in the direction of avoiding pregnancy. That might be okay, but just know that you're not going to get the published efficacy of 98% if you are not doing it by following the rules taught to you by an instructor.
Sure. Yeah. Just a couple of weeks ago, Theresa, I was talking with a couple who was going through marriage prep, and I was telling them about Marquette, and they're like, great. So I could just buy the Clearblue monitor and look at the instruction book. And I was like, no, that is not the method. That is a tool that assists the Marquette method in the protocols that they have set up.
I will say, for couples who are trying to conceive, if they're really sure about that and they feel like they may, they don't have warning signs of infertility or that it might take them a while, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting the Clearblue monitor and using it for a couple cycles in the way it was intended, because that is what it was created for, to provide simplicity for couples who are trying to conceive. So that's certainly an option. However, If a couple finds that they're not conceiving right away, or, within 6 months, then it might be a good time to reach out to an instructor who can kind of help augment their use of that device and see what else is going on through charting their cycles that might help provide some direction to their situation.
Oh, thank you, Theresa. That is really important information for everybody to know. Christina, can you tell us what about Boston Crosscheck you would like people to understand better?
Yeah, Ellen, thank you for teeing up this whole conversation about like tools versus methods, because a lot of people will say, I'm using Boston Crosscheck, when what they mean is they've learned Marquette and they're adding temperatures in. They think that Boston Crosscheck is just Marquette plus temperatures. And I think that's a disservice to both of the methods, because Marquette has temperature protocols and people deserve to know that and to be able to integrate that into their Marquette option if they want to. So Boston Crosscheck and Marquette, while we use the same biomarkers, we are different methods. We have different protocols. We have different calculations, even with the same tools. And so I think that's just where people should understand that when you're engaging in a method, it's not just about which tools you're using, it's about how you're using them. And that's what makes the method.
Definitely. That's huge. And I think, and please, Theresa and Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of one of the ways that I like to explain the difference between Marquette and Boston Crosscheck is that Marquette comes from the monitor, and then you can add in the others if you want additional information. Boston Crosscheck comes from, let's learn all three and then decide which of those work best for your cycle, your body, what you're looking for. Okay, I'm getting nods. Great. Good thing I've been telling people that, because that would have been bad if it was wrong. Melissa, can you tell us what about Chart Neo you would like people to understand a little bit better?
Yes, I'm excited about this question. So there are really three things. First is that it is a tool, and we're trying to solve a pretty complex problem of how can we be friendly to these variety of methods and respect their protocols by still being like kind of a one-stop shop for secure data, really convenient charting. And so with that, we do use protocols from different methods, but it's not all lumped together. So you really have to be educated and work with a provider who is familiar with this platform. For example, cervical mucus, base those protocols off of Creighton to default a peak day. However, it is to the ultimate user and their protocols to go in and manually select that peak day. For basal body temperature thermal shift, we use our guidelines based on SensiPlan, which is kind of the gold standard if you are computing it, because it's black and white rules. What that gives you is a variety of temp shifts around your peak day. You have to go in with your informed choice and select which temp shift is closely associated with the ovulatory event. So we are really designed so that no matter what method you're using, if you have an instructor who is well-versed in the Chart Neo framework, then you can really navigate it to your individual needs. The second is the incredible health record that the Chart Neo app becomes when you pair it with the web portal. The web portal is GDPR and HIPAA compliant. What that means is we are a hospital grade application. So when you work through it, you're like, I kind of feel like I'm on my chart. So we have in-house communication, but it's very secure. So there are all of these apps on the market, but this is very sensitive, very intimate data that you're charting. And we work very hardly to protect your data. We don't sell or fish any data. So data security is very, very important to us. And then the third thing is that if you are working with a medical provider, we have really built the back end that is completely free to any RRM, NAPRO, FAbM provider. When I say RRM, that's kind of a generic umbrella term for restorative reproductive medicine. So you can print your chart and take it to them. And if they're trained in Creighton, if they're trained in Sympto Pro, if they're trained in Billings, they will be able to navigate the basics of a chart if they really understand the concepts of a well-charted cycle. And then second, if they're in the portal, they have access and you can digitally communicate, and you can input tests. You can view those tests and how they shift over time. So if you are working, for example, with a Creighton provider and you're doing cycle-targeted hormone panels, that's really important to be able to document. We also have the ability to have an intake form. So you have your intake form with a very thorough history. So if you are charting well in the ChartNeo app, you really have a fantastic, very thorough reproductive health record that you can follow throughout your reproductive lifetime. Especially important if you are dealing with health issues or infertility, polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, anything like that. So you can see, okay, what are the treatment protocols? Because we do have a test option where you are putting in testing as well as medications. And how is that influencing your cycle? How is that influencing your fertility? How is it influencing the symptoms? So it's fairly robust. And for the first time user who's getting in, it can be really overwhelming. But the important thing is you are taking the principles that you are taught according to the method and you are applying it to this tool. So you're not using all the things, you're selecting from a menu so that this can be custom and tailor-made to your specific methodology for cycle charting.
That is awesome. Thank you, Melissa. I think a lot of people on here probably are brand new to ChartNeo, so that was really important info to share. So we did get a question in the chat over here. And I think this is a little bit more specific. Probably Mary and Theresa, you might want to answer because she specifically mentions Creighton and Marquette. So the question is, how is LH testing reliable if you have PCOS and you're postpartum and trying to avoid? Very specific situation here. Doesn't LH vary no matter where you are at in your cycle? This person has been using Creighton Method for a couple of years now and is considering Marquette. So maybe Mary, do you want to speak to this a little bit? And then Theresa, and I don't know, Mairead or Christina, if you want to chime in too. So yeah, Mary, why don't you take it away?
I think Theresa would actually probably be better at answering this first, because I really don't know a lot about the LH side of things. So Creighton is pretty straightforward. I mean, as far as the mucus goes, it is and isn't straightforward, but if you know what I mean. We're only looking at mucus. So I'll let Theresa start, and then if I can cover anything else, I'll tackle that.
Perfect. All right, Theresa, take it away.
I think this is a fantastic question. So just for anybody who doesn't know, in a woman's cycle, in a regular cycle, she should only have one LH surge, which results in ovulation. However, for some women who have PCOS, and also for some women who are breastfeeding, it's possible to have an LH surge that should trigger ovulation that is unsuccessful. And what we call that is like a false peak for Marquette. And there are ways that we can identify this. I want to rewind a little bit to PCOS. There is a common misconception as well that everybody who has PCOS has multiple LH surges and the hormones are just kind of going crazy all the time. And, some people do have a little bit crazier of hormones or hormones that are a little bit less predictable, particularly those with PCOS. However, in my experience, so this is anecdotal, a smaller percentage of women actually have multiple LH surges when they have PCOS. So I'll speak to kind of both of those circumstances. Most of the clients I have with PCOS typically actually only have one LH surge that we truly pick up with the monitor or the LH tests, in which case it would be pretty simple approach, very similar to regular cycles. However, if it's somebody who may have multiple LH surges, and honestly, I would approach this with any client knowing she has PCOS, because we wouldn't know which of those categories she would fall into. We would be very careful about the LH surges that we see, meaning whenever she has an LH surge, whether that's with her monitor or with a secondary LH test, we would confirm it, meaning we would also look for signs of progesterone that only is present after a successful ovulation, meaning I would have her utilize the proof tests, which is another urinary test that looks for the presence of progesterone, or I'd have her track her basal body temperature or temp drop or something like that. So we would approach the situation from the get-go, knowing she may have risk factors for false peak with security measures in place per se. We would be very careful. Now, different instructors might approach this differently, but this would be a situation where that client probably wouldn't be as successful if she looked at the protocols on the paper and just decided to go for it and follow it herself, because the approach to her situation would probably be highly individualized and she'd have to work very closely with an instructor. But it is very possible to do Marquette with PCOS and multiple LH surges, even if breastfeeding. You just need to make sure you're keeping in touch with your instructor about that.
Sure, sure. Christina, I know you want to say something, but I think Mary, why don't you chime in first and then Christina?
Yeah, again, with Creighton, we're not looking at LH. We're not trained to look at LH at all. But typically with PCOS, this is not every PCOS client, but many times PCOS will show up with continuous mucus on like a Creighton chart. So in that case, there's still a very distinct change in the mucus during the time of fertility. So that's what we would be looking for. You'd have to find a good connection with your practitioner. Not every, it takes practice to get really good at helping your clients to distinguish that point of change. That's what we call it. So you have essentially the same mucus, which is like the same old stuff you see all the time. And then when fertility, that estrogen starts to rise to trigger, or then the LH triggers ovulation, there's a very big change in the mucus. So you have to be, what I say, get a PhD in your cervical mucus. And this is easier for some women than others. And this is what I mean, like, this is a good fit for some women, but for some women, it's not. And Marquette might be a better fit for you. It totally depends on the individual person and their personality, what they're comfortable with. But again, it also has to do with the instructor. So it could be as simple as finding a different instructor, maybe a better practitioner fit, or switching to another method where the biomarkers are a little bit more clear for you.
Mary, thank you for mentioning that. I think that's really important to recognize, is just that there are so many different methods. And so there's kind of two big factors if a method's going to be a good fit for you. One is the biomarkers. Are the biomarkers a good fit for you? Is the methodology, whatever, how they teach the method going to be a good fit for you? For example, the way that Creighton teaches and the way that Billing teaches are very different, even though they are both mucus only methods. And then the other side of that, the other factor is the instructor a good fit for you? That is really important, that you have a good relationship with your instructor. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Christina.
No, wait, Christina, I'm sorry, really quick. I just want to add too, besides the instructor, the way the woman's body works matters too, because there's some women who their mucus is very easy to understand. And for other women, it's not. So just because a friend, like another woman maybe has a better connection with one biomarker, doesn't mean it wouldn't be a lot easier for another woman too. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Christina.
No, it's fine. It's fine. All important things. I just wanted to kind of tag team on what Theresa said, because it was really awesome. The question specifically, it sounded like, was PCOS and postpartum, right? So Theresa did a fabulous job talking about how we would confirm, right, that ovulation did happen. But we also have to think about like how we identify fertility leading up to. And so my recommendation, LH testing, LH is a hormone that tends to have rapid surges. It doesn't have a long buildup of hormone interplay. And so when you are looking at return of fertility situations, when you're PCOS and you may have long cycles anyway, it's very important to be looking at an estrogenic biomarker, something that is either going to be your cervical fluid or using the Clearblue monitor, which tracks the estrogen hormone as well, to get that lead up and that notification that you may be heading into ovulatory territory, which would then result in an LH peak. So I think, covering both of those scenarios, making sure that you can confirm maybe with the progesterone somehow that was ovulatory, but also looking at the front end as well, tracking estrogen leading up to ovulation is very important.
Fabulous. Yeah. Thank you for adding that. Yes, please, Kristen.
Yes, this is a great question. And everything y'all have said is wonderful. What I wanted to say with Billings is what we're actually looking for when we say peak is the LH surge. So when we are talking about when you've had a peak, it is whether or not your LH has surged. And we have three very specific things that we're looking for in the mucus pattern that confirm both the estrogen rise, but also the progesterone rise, and the fact that the LH has actually gotten high enough to produce an ovulation. So when looking at postpartum and when looking at PCOS, often a woman will have a lot of little rises, a little bit of estrogen here, a little bit of LH, but then it kind of peters out, or even a whole bunch of estrogen, a whole bunch of LH, but also doesn't have one of those three symptoms. And so we would treat that a little bit differently and wouldn't actually call it an LH peak because it's not. And so we would treat it differently looking at it. So that's one place where I really feel like Billings can shine if you're looking for a more simple method that doesn't need to use a monitor, is that we can see whether or not you've actually had an LH surge, or if it was just a little rise that petered out because your body's not ready yet.
Fabulous. Yeah. Postpartum can definitely be a difficult time to chart in. I'm seeing everybody just nodding in agreement. Those of us who, work with clients in the postpartum time, we recognize that this is a really a difficult time, regardless of if you have PCOS or not, or some other, hormonal imbalance or irregularity in your cycle. It's really important in the postpartum time to have a good relationship with your instructor, work very closely, confirm that you are understanding the protocols if you are trying to avoid in that time. All right. Thank you for that question, for putting that in. Again, if any of you guys are listening and you want to add a question in to this group of instructors, please feel free to put that in the chat. We'd love to answer your questions. So now let's talk a little bit about the opening and closing of the fertile window for your method. So we're going to just kind of really round robin this. We're going to start with opening the fertile window, and then we'll go back and we'll do closing the fertile window. So can you tell us, each of you, what is it that opens the fertile window for your method? And again, if you are trying to avoid, the fertile window is when you would abstain. So what we're talking about is what is the indication of the beginning of abstinence for each of these different methods. So Mary, why don't you start us off with Creighton?
Yeah, we always say, generally speaking, all mucus is fertile, at least as you start off. Now, unless you have continuous mucus, if you have continuous mucus, that's obviously not true. But generally speaking, if you don't have continuous mucus, we consider all mucus fertile. So with Creighton, the instruction is to make observations 100% of the time when you go to the bathroom, and some other times too. You do not need to make observations during your moderate and heavy days of bleeding of the period, but you always begin on your light and very light days of bleeding. If you were to have an early ovulation, you would see it then. So whenever the mucus starts in the cycle, generally speaking, that's when fertility begins. But also, if you have any unusual bleeding past that first 7 days, that would be considered fertile as well in Creighton.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Kristen with Billings.
Sure. So in Billings, we are looking at the mucus patterns. And so every woman, when their estrogen is below threshold, you will have an unchanging pattern of mucus. That may be that you have no mucus and it's just dry, but it could be that you have like a low level of moisture just every day, the same thing, same thing, same thing. So the point that we say that fertility has begun is when that unchanging pattern changes. So when there is something different, so you're going along same, and one day you're walking around and you feel something, you're like, oh, I did not have that yesterday. That's the beginning of your fertile window.
Great. Kelly with SymptoPro. Oh, you are on mute, Kelly.
So with SymptoPro, during the learning phase, we take a very conservative approach to the pre-ovulatory time. And we use a borderline rule that is based upon the length of the woman's previous cycles, so her past cycles. Then after about 6 months of charting, if the woman's cycle meets certain criteria, then she's able to begin the fertile time with the start of mucus. And that's either whether that mucus is, whether she sees it on the tissue, feels it in a vaginal sensation, or observes a change in her cervix. So we always say that borderline rules are generally more effective than going further into the pre-ovulatory time. So at that point, after the learning phase, a couple really has to discern, do they feel comfortable going past the borderline? So it's more than just the actual science of what your signs say. It's also the art of how comfortable am I going beyond that borderline.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. Mairead, can you tell us about what opens the fertile window for FAbM?
Yeah, so it's pretty similar to Billings in that you're looking at your cycle pattern. So really, when we're going through instruction with a client, you're looking at least those first 3 cycles and establishing what kind of cycle pattern you have. And if you're seeing that there is a continuous mucus before a distinct point of change, that's going to help you to establish that change within, an infertile quality type mucus versus like fertile. But, if you're somebody that's kind of all over the board, then you're looking similar to Creighton, where you're considering these mucus patterns to still potentially be fertile until you can establish that difference. And there might be some overlap within your light days of bleeding and your fertile window opening, that point of change. So once again, making sure that you're paying really close attention to those days that might be a bit obscured with bleeding is going to be hugely important.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Marie. Theresa, can you tell us about what opens the fertile window with Marquette?
Sure. This is going to depend a little bit on which biomarkers one is choosing to track. For the Clear Blue Fertility Monitor, that's going to start fertility on, it depends on if they're charting with the Clear Blue Fertility Monitor or with mucus, and also on an algorithm. So to be fully transparent with Marquette, for the first 6 cycles of charting, if somebody is having cycles and not breastfeeding, fertility starts on day 6. Once they reach the first 6 cycles, they're able to rely more on what the monitor is saying. And that's if they're only charting the hormones. Now, if somebody's also incorporating mucus, then similar to what others have said, we have a certain mucus level that we would start the fertile window on. But typically it would be based off of the Marquette algorithm, which one learns after 6 cycles of charting.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Theresa. And Christina with Boston Crosscheck, tell us about what opens the fertile window.
Similarly to Marquette, we will have either a calculated algorithm based on cycle data and what we already know about your monitor peak readings, your temperature spikes, and things like that. Or we'll be looking at real-time biomarkers. So for example, if you calculate with the algorithm that fertility begins on day 8 of your cycle, and then you start to get fertile signs from a real-time biomarker, those would trump the calculation, right? So we're always looking at what is your body actually telling you. We don't just rely on the calculated date. Similarly to Marquette, we have a learning time with that algorithm. So within the first year, essentially, we're using a modified Doring rule for that algorithm, for that start of the calculation of fertility. After the first year, we can lighten one of the parameters and one of the restrictions a little bit and get a little bit more usable days back at the beginning of the cycle for people who had longer cycles, but we wait to see a full year's worth of fertility patterns before we make that change.
Sure. Great. So now I'd like to talk about what closes. Okay. Melissa, why don't you chime in?
I'd love to speak to this because in chart new, so we do have a fertile window indicator, which is a blue bar at the top of your chart. And there are a variety of different ways to trigger that opening of the fertile window. So first of all, cervical mucus. Once you start seeing cervical mucus, you are going to see that that's opened the fertile window. You also have the ability to enable a calendar calculation based on the Doring rule. And so that's going to scan your previous 6 charted cycles, and it's going to subtract 6 days from your earliest peak date charted. We highly recommend that women do use that if they have a limited mucus cycle at all. So, while we are not a method specific, we do take in, again, the protocols of various methods, and then you use that according to your own intention. But like when I'm teaching women, if we do see limited mucus, so I'm not seeing a nice 5 to 6 day mucus buildup, we are going to enable that calendar calculation rule because we do know that fertility pre-peak can occur on a dry day. So it's really about meeting each woman where they're at and their specific needs, and then finding the protocol that works for them. So we have consulted in the building of this Chart Neo tool with instructors from a variety of methods. Again, it's not all applied, so it's not a dump of protocols, but you are able to select and really customize the app according to your needs. But it's not as customizable as something like, say, Read Your Body. It's all within the parameters of methods that have been studied, and we really focus with that view of that restorative reproductive medicine. So really focusing on those protocols. The reason that we do have options, but they're limited options, is also so that as women chart this in a very secure application, that they can select to be part of research. And so we are really a tool that has been based on all of this wonderful research from our predecessors, but we're hoping to launch it in the future. We need research. And so using specific protocols, really having a methodology to charting, you document that well in your chart, and then we're going to be able to manipulate this data if you agree to the research to really get future research projects up and running. And it's going to be really, really exciting.
Fabulous. That's awesome. For those of you watching, you might have heard Melissa mention Read Your Body. We are going to talk a little bit about apps in a little bit. I do have a question about apps that we'll chat about. But what I want to do is finish this out. We're going to round robin now about what closes your fertility window. Then we got another question in the chat. So for those of you who are putting those questions in, just know we are getting to them. We just want to finish questions that we're on while we're on them. So Mary, can you tell us about what closes the fertile window for Creighton?
Yeah, so Creighton is very specific with the mucus. It's very detailed. The mucus is categorized as either peak type mucus or non-peak type mucus, and each of those categories has a specific criteria under them. So as the estrogen rises, the mucus begins to take on those peak type characteristics, with which Creighton classifies as any mucus that is crystal clear, stretches an inch or more, or is lubricative when you wipe, that sensation. So the last day of any peak type mucus that is observed begins the 3 count. So then there's 3 count. The 3 count after that closes the fertile window. So the first time of fertility after that is actually the end of the day of the 4th day following the peak day, because the longest a woman could ovulate is 3 days following the peak day. But if she ovulates at the end of the day, that egg could live up to 24 hours, which takes us to the end of the day of P+4.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary. And Kristen, for Billings, what closes the fertile window?
Sure. So we're again looking at that pattern of the mucus. And so as the mucus is changing and progressing up towards slippery, we're looking for those very specific 3 criteria to confirm whether or not the LH has actually surged. Once we confirm that, we mark peak day on that LH surge day. And with Billings research, we look at ovulation either happening on peak day or 1 to 2 days after. And so we actually count 3 days after the peak, because if you ovulate as late as possible on day 2, we wait that 24 hours, just like Creighton. But that puts us at the beginning of the 4th day is available for intercourse at that point. And then anytime during that luteal phase, you will not have fertility again once the LH peak has actually been determined. So yeah, that's the end, peak +3.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. Kelly, can you tell us about what closes the fertile window for SymptoPro? You are on mute again, by the way.
I'm so sorry. So what closes the fertile window for SymptoPro is something called the symptothermal rule. And to apply the symptothermal rule, we cross-check the cervical mucus, vaginal sensation, and basal body temperature observations. So first, we find the peak day, which SymptoPro defines as the last day of the most fertile sign, which is very similar to what Mary had described as that peak type mucus. We call it egg white mucus, but it could also be the last day of your most fertile vaginal sensation sign. So you don't have to have both of those fertile signs on the same day. It's just whatever occurs last. And then after that, you mark your peak day. You begin to interpret your cervical mucus, your basal body temperature observation. So you want to look for 3 temperatures that are higher than the 6 temperatures that precede it. After that point, you draw 2 lines. One's called a pre-rise baseline, and one is called a full thermal shift line. Then, and this is complicated, so and it takes a while to learn. So when you learn this method, you don't just know all this in your head automatically. It takes some time. And so after that, you begin to encircle high temperatures after the peak day, and we have certain criteria that enables you to circle those high temperatures, and that's how you cross-check the cervical mucus with the basal body temperature. Is those high temperatures have to be after the peak day, and then if on the 3rd day, that 3rd encircled high, if that temperature meets certain criteria, then infertility begins that evening. If not, you wait 1 more day, and it begins on the next evening. And then when the symptothermal rule is fulfilled, we say that intercourse is available any time of the day until the end of the cycle.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. Mairead, can you tell us about what closes the fertile window for FAbM?
Yeah, so it's similar to Billings in that you're looking for that dry up pattern. You're looking specifically at cycle patterns over time, and you're observing for those particular qualities of fertile cervical mucus. So that stretchy, clear, slippery type mucus. One of those 3 qualities is going to indicate peak fertility, and you're looking for that immediate dry up and counting the same peak +3. FAbM does not incorporate basal body temperature as part of its protocol. So you're specifically looking at the LH and cervical mucus, that connection there and the patterns over time. And then if you wanted to add in like BBT or PROVE, that would just be kind of additional information for you. It's not something that we're going to rely on to help close the fertile window.
Perfect. Thank you. Theresa, can you tell us about what closes the fertile window with Marquette?
Yes, so the fertile window with Marquette closes 3 full days after the latest day of peak. And we say it that way because the peak day for mucus and LH on some occasions may be on different days. So if one is charting both biomarkers, it needs to be after the latest day of peak. If somebody is just charting with the Clearblue fertility monitor, it's going to be 4 days after that first peak day. So I often say peak plus 4. One thing I do like to say about Marquette that some people are often confused by is it sounds like we're adding extra days of fertility compared to the other methods that say peak plus 3. A unique thing about Marquette in charting with the LH surge is that the LH surge is going to happen 24 to 48 hours prior to ovulation, meaning we have an earlier heads up on ovulation than perhaps some of the mucus methods, because the peak day for mucus may come after that LH surge. Typically speaking, the biomarkers most of the time will line up on the same day so that the fertile window ends the same way with different methods or different biomarkers. But I just like to say that the LH surge gives you an earlier heads up on the end of fertility, but it doesn't add additional days to the end of fertility. If there were issues calculating either of those biomarkers in any particular cycle, we also might rely on LH tests, the PROVE tests, or temperatures to confirm ovulation in those situations.
Great. Thank you, Theresa. And Christina, can you tell us about Boston Crosscheck?
Right. So we will utilize what's called the cross-check rule. So whatever indicators that you're looking at, we have very simple calculations for identifying peak with fluid, peak with the monitor, and then identifying a 4/6 temperature shift, which is a little bit different from a standard 3/6. It's a simplified calculation. And then it also lines up with the other indicators. So what we say is we're looking at all 3 of these calculations independently. We will then cross-check them. And essentially you're waiting for your latest sign to confirm that fertility has ended. And that would be upon waking the 4th day that all criteria are met.
Perfect. Awesome. So it's really interesting to learn how the different methods kind of calculate this closing of the fertile window. And yeah, Melissa, I'm going to get to you. I just wanted to say something really quick. So it's really interesting to see how they utilize their research in slightly different ways. And for some of them, it's the evening of the 3rd day, the evening of the 4th day, the beginning of the 4th day. So there's just like slight differences in the research, slight differences in the use of the methods and the use of the biomarkers was what I meant to say. So it's just really interesting to learn. But what we're looking at is a difference of about 24 hours between, when a fertile window would close with all of these methods. We're not looking at like major differences in amount of time. You're not going to like abstain for an additional week if you use Marquette. Melissa, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, so the ChartNeo app does have a built-in algorithm for closing the fertile window indicator. And so we do exactly what you said. It's all a relatively kind of similar approach. We take the most conservative approaches that are out there. And so we do use cervical mucus based on the Creighton approach of 3 full days past the peak day. But you'll notice that fertile window indicator will go P plus 4. And then according to your protocol, you get to decide on that P plus 4 working with your instructor. Does infertility resume in the morning or the evening? That peak day is calculated based on the last day of peak type mucus according to the stretchability. Was it stretchy? Was it clear? Or was it slippery? Or if you're charting vulvar sensation, because you do not have good cervical mucus, it'll go on the last day of a peak vulvar sensation. And then it is cross-checked with a thermal temperature shift according to the Cincy Plan guidelines, and or a positive PROVE progesterone test. Now, PROVE progesterone testing the PDG metabolite, it's relatively new. They've got some great studies backing them up, but because it is new, we are very conservative. So if you get a positive PROVE, you're actually going to see your fertile window indicator go an extra 24 hours. We've just built in that cushion until we can get some more substantial research data on that. But it's very, very effective. And that's if you're getting a positive proof before the 4 count past the peak day. So we do have, again, we're trying to be friendly to all of these methods, but for the opening and the closing, we do have some specific protocols, and they are rather conservative. And then it's up to you working with your instructor so that you can kind of dwindle that down according to the approach that you use.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. And you might be wondering, if you're listening, like, why are we waiting for the last thing to confirm this? Why are we, what Christina was saying with Boston Crosscheck, if you're charting all 3 things with Boston Crosscheck, why do I have to wait for the last one to confirm? Well, what instructors are doing, if you tell your instructor, I am trying to avoid, your instructor is going to teach the method to the highest efficacy that the method that they teach utilizes. So what Christina was talking about with waiting, for whatever that last indicator was, or what Kelly was talking about with depending on how strong the temperature rise is, there might be an additional day added to that. That is because we as instructors are teaching to that highest efficacy. Now, of course, you and your spouse are individuals. Your instructor is not the gatekeeper of your sex life at all. You can make whatever decisions you want. You can have sex whenever you want. But your instructor if you have told your instructor, I am trying to avoid, your instructor is going to teach you what those guidelines and rules are for trying to avoid to the highest efficacy. Kristen, did you want to add something in?
I did. Well, I just wanted to say how interesting it is, and something to keep in mind as you're looking to try and choose a method is that I think every single one of us mentioned the word peak, but we all use it a little bit differently. And so just confirming again, like whenever you decide what method you want to give a try, like go all in with that method and don't try and pick and choose, because as is pretty obvious, like we have different science, we have different research and different protocols, and even different ways of using that word. And so I just want to encourage you, like whatever you pick, go with it all the way. See if it works for you. If you decide you want to try something different, then go all in with the next method. But try not to pick and choose, because you will not get the efficacy that all of us love about our methods by trying to pick and choose from different ones.
Yeah. You know what, Kristen, what you just said actually is a great segue to a question that we got on the chat. So I'm skipping ahead. If you ask the question about instructors, don't worry, we'll get to it. But we're going to talk about when should you consider switching methods? How long into a method should you get before you kind of say, ooh, maybe I should switch methods? I think this is a fantastic question. If anybody wants to just chime in on this, please. I know yes, Kelly.
So I think it really depends upon whether you're brand new to fertility awareness or whether you are experienced. Because if you're new, you're going to need some time to get to really understand how to make the observations correctly and understand what you're seeing. So if you only give yourself 2 cycles and you say, oh no, this is not working for me, you probably just need a little more time to come to know your body. Then I would say after about 6 cycles, that's enough time, well, 4 to 6, but 6 would be better, for your instructor to say, this is what I'm seeing on your cycle. This method may not be the best for you. Why don't you go ahead and try something else? If you're experienced, then you're past that learning curve. So I think you can come to understand a little bit sooner, but I would at least give it 3 months.
Kelly, I think that was that's a great indicator. I was going to suggest most instructors, when you kind of like purchase the package of learning the method. Now, not all instructors do this, some of them it's pay per, class or whatever, but a lot of instructors will kind of have a package that you purchase this and you have a certain amount of follow-up time. And that's typically going to be about 6 months. I know for Boston Crosscheck, it's actually a year. And some of you guys might want to chime in how long it is, for your method, but, I would say go with that amount of time that they already give you follow-up for, because one, you've already paid for it. And you can work one-on-one with that instructor and like keep asking them questions through that entire follow-up time of like, I'm seeing this, this isn't making sense. I don't understand this. And ask your instructor too, do you think that this method is a good fit for me? Because I know from experience as an instructor, I had a client who came on with me, and within 2 cycles, I told her, this is not the method for you. You need to switch. Well, I didn't tell her you need to switch methods, but I suggested, like, I really think that this method would actually be a better fit for you because of your personality, because of what we're seeing on your charts. There's a lot of different factors that come into it. But I think a lot of times your instructor can be a good indicator. And can kind of help you too, of kind of working out if the method is a good fit. Yes, Theresa.
I also want to point out, I think it'd be important to take a look at what's not working. Like, is it the biomarker that's not working? Is it your relationship with the instructor that's not working? Are you engaged and stressed out, and NFP is just like charting is really tough, Are there life factors? Are there issues with your marriage? Is your spouse supportive? I think it's really important to kind of dive in and say, what here is not working? Because some things the instructor can help you figure out, particularly with some of these methods that have more flexibility in the biomarkers. Maybe you switch to charting a different biomarker. I know, like, for example, with Marquette, sometimes I have clients who the Clearblue monitor isn't the best tool for them, and we'll transition them to another tool with Marquette. And so I think it's really important, like you mentioned, to really, talk to the instructor about it, talk to your spouse about it, see what it is about it that's not working, because some of those things can be changed within your method. Maybe it means the method is okay and you need a different instructor, or yes, maybe it does mean it's an entirely different method. But I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this is not the method for me. Maybe certain things that you're doing aren't working for you, but kind of evaluate what might be more easily changed, what might not be.
That is a really good point. Thank you, Theresa. Marae, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think everybody's points have been awesome. But I think one of the things that I know everybody here has been doing a really great job of is trying to share, and this is something I'll try to share with people who are potential clients, just the amount of options that are out there. Because I think so many people, when they're going through marriage prep or they're first introduced to fertility awareness, they're first introduced to NFP, they're told about 1, maybe 2 options, and they think that that's it. So the fact that all of us are coming together and having this conversation and sharing about what's going to be really beneficial for one person versus another, and when you might want to shy away versus lean into another biomarker, is just so helpful to put the big picture perspective on, who might be interested in XYZ method, and allow you that opportunity in that space to really sit with this information and think about your lifestyle and think about your interests and how comfortable you might be with particular methods. Because I think you can make any method work for you. You really can. You might make one method work versus another a little bit more easily, but it's, a matter of looking at your lifestyle and looking at your interests and that instructor client fit, and figuring out how you want to have that, really be a part of your life versus very limited, because some people love to have all the data and some people just give me all I need to know, the bare minimum, and that's it. So I love that we're having this conversation, and I think that everybody here does a really great job of just sharing the benefits of charting in general and sharing all the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to recognize too that while all of these methods might have different research, they might have done different studies, we are looking at the exact same hormone sequence. We are looking at the same biomarkers. While Creighton and Billings might categorize the cervical mucus differently, they are looking at the same exact pattern that cervical mucus is doing, because estrogen is rising as we get closer to ovulation, and cervical mucus is going to be the visible sign of that rising of estrogen, right? And that's the same for all of these other biomarkers. So we might categorize them differently. We might say, use different words to describe peak day and things like that. But we are talking about the exact same science. So Theresa and Marae, what you were kind of saying about don't jump ship too quickly. I think that's really important is, give the method some time. really work with the instructor, because that it's the same science, it's the same things. Melissa, why don't you speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, and I love this question. I think first it's, follow your intuition. If it's not working, it's not working. However, like you said, don't jump ship too quickly. And this is an exercise that I do with all of my clients in the first module of our work together, is the charting mindset. So first of all, you have to understand your why. Why is charting and practicing natural family planning or fertility awareness important to you? I think we can all agree that when we're working with clients, we want them to really adopt this as a daily practice for the rest of their reproductive lifetime. And we also have to realize that we are all ingrained in this modern world with some sort of contraceptive mentality where we have control over this. And when we are charting and practicing natural family planning, we are not in control. We're simply making observations. So when we start to get frustrated and feel like we're white knuckling it, it's usually because we don't like what our chart is telling us. We can't control that part of it. We can control how we interact with the data, the choices that we make according to our intention, but ultimately we can't manipulate it. And so I think it's really important to, first and foremost, if you're getting frustrated, check your mindset and do some mindset work about why you're doing this. Why is it important? And how is it different maybe than approaches that people around you are practicing, or what you've kind of been indoctrinated to think, because we've all seen and heard a million commercials. And so really just check the mindset first.
Oh, that's huge, Melissa. Yeah, mindset is huge when it comes to using natural family planning in all aspects of utilizing natural family planning to plan your family. Control is not the case. So I think this is actually a great segue into this other question that was posed in the chat about instructors. How do you know if an instructor is a good fit for you? Ooh, this is such a good question. I love it. I want to speak to a couple of things, and then anybody here who wants to chime in, please go right ahead. So my first indication when I read this question was, does your personality match the instructor in how you are communicating? So when the instructor explains a concept, does it make sense? Or are you just like totally, completely lost? Now, of course, a lot of these are new concepts, and you might be totally, completely lost the first time the instructor explains it to you. And that's not an indication that you need a new instructor. That's an indication that you're learning something new. But if, as you ask questions and continue to try to learn more, if it's just still not clicking, if after a couple of cycles, if you are still relying on your instructor to give you the calculated end of fertility, and you're still not able to start making those connections. Now, of course, your instructor is there. You're able to rely on your instructor to help you learn the opening and closing of the fertile window. But your instructor's goal is to get you to a point where you know those rules, you know how to open and close your fertile window on your own. So if you feel like you are still stuck relying and you're like not getting it, that could be an indication that maybe the instructor is just not speaking the same language as you. Another indication is if you are not getting the feedback that you're looking for. So if you reach out to your instructor and say, hey, here's my chart, can you take a look? And your instructor, maybe you're looking for a super quick answer, and your instructor just like goes a totally different direction, and you're kind of like you're like more confused after talking to them. Maybe that's not a great fit. Or maybe you're looking for the other thing, right? You're looking for really, really in-depth information, and your instructor just gives you quick things. Now, of course, again, don't just jump ship. Talk with your instructor, tell them what you need. But if after you've tried to work with your instructor and talk about these kinds of things, and it's just still not working, or you're just still not understanding, that might be an indication that it's time to switch instructors. Those were kind of my initial thoughts. What else does anybody else have? Mairead, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, I think that's really great. Having that foundation of what are the expectations from the client and the instructor is huge. Really thinking like, when do you expect to hear a response from me as an instructor? I will lay things out. Like, for instance, I am in school. I know Theresa is in school. So when you're working with a client, telling them, this is my situation, or with family life, or whatever it is, this is when you can expect to hear from me, whether via email, via, if you communicate with your clients via text, or however that looks. Maybe if you're going through like the Chartneo platform, for instance. I think that's really important, first of all, to lay that out. And then I think when it comes down to, if you really want to work within this particular method, and you like this instructor and you like their personality and the expectations there fit, you might want to think about, what additional information are they considering sharing with me, and how do they share that? Like you're saying, I personally love to teach this information and go really in depth as much as possible in the science, because that's how I geek out about it. And I will share that with people. And if they are not interested in that, and they don't want to know all the little nuanced details about what goes on within the body, within this hormonal cycle, I might not be the best fit for them. And the other thing that I personally like to have a conversation with people about, and I know Theresa is another person that loves this, is cycle syncing, and looking at, how you can use this information and kind of shift your lifestyle here and there to approach in a more gentle manner, leaning into how your hormones are, how they're affecting your life in a variety of ways. So asking your instructor questions like that and saying, how do you like to teach? How is this information being delivered? Getting all of those details, those boundaries, and those unique interests, I think is going to help you kind of pull together the big picture of who this person is and how you might benefit from working with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Mairead. Christina, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think one of the things that all of our responses so far are taking for granted that bears saying explicitly is that you need to have an instructor that you trust respects you as a person. You need to have an instructor who respects your autonomy as a charter. You need to have an instructor who respects you as an adult, as, somebody who is capable of doing this for yourself and communicating your needs. If you have an instructor who ever belittles you, makes you feel bad about your charting experience, who talks down to you ever, run away. Like you deserve to work with somebody who shows you respect and someone you can trust to have your best interests in mind during the instruction process.
That is huge, Christina. And just to piggyback on that, if you have an instructor that ever questions your intention to try to avoid or conceive, you need to step away from that instructor. That decision is between you, your spouse, and God. Your instructor is not here to give you advice on, what your discernment process should be if it's time to avoid or achieve. That is hugely important. And you should never feel pressured by your instructor or by anyone. You should never feel pressured by anyone else other than, maybe God, to change your intention to avoid or conceive. That is absolutely your decision. Would anyone else like to chime in on about instructors? Yeah, Creighton. I'm sorry, Mary.
Same thing, I guess. I just wanted to say, the instructor should never be making any kind of decision for the client. The instructor's job is to provide the client or the client couple with information to empower them to make decisions on their own. There shouldn't be any swaying in any, whether it has to do with like when you're having sex or having a baby or anything with health. I know we have our own opinions and sometimes it's hard to keep those to ourselves, but our job is to provide information and allow them to make the best decision. And I don't know, actually, we were talking about when the time to switch methods is. Some instructors, have a hard time referring for other methods, honestly. And I think that we're in a role to actually we can help them make a decision. Like, is this not a good method fit? So it might not be an awful idea to ask the instructor, have you ever referred any of your clients to another method or made another suggestion? Have you at least given them information just to gauge? Because if they're like, nope, then you're not going to get help from them. If you start to have trouble, you may not be able to rely on them to say, hey, maybe you should look into this method.
That's a really good point, Mary. So we've got a couple of quick questions that were brought up actually earlier this week over Instagram that we're going to go through, and then we're going to go ahead and close this out. So these are a little bit more method specific. With Marquette, this question was posed, what is the best app to track with for the Marquette method?
I think the best app or technology or chart for anybody to use is the one that works best for them. Because again, we want you to be successful, whatever your intentions are. And so if you just have a preference or one that you're more likely to open up every day, I think that's the best one for you. So I'm not really going to say which one is best, because I do think that's an individual decision. I will also say, though, my personal preference, and I think a lot of the other instructors agree, is Read Your Body is a very versatile, very extensive app that can be targeted for any method. Whole Mission, the group that I work with, does have a personalized template that you can download from Marquette. It has place for the Clear Blue monitor, for the LH test, for the proof test, for mucus, for temperature, for whichever biomarkers you want to chart. Same goes for any of the other methods here. And I think that's a very versatile app that works very well, particularly for Marquette. So that would be my personal preference. But again, it really depends on what's going to work best for you. Also talk to your instructor, because some instructors have really cool spreadsheet charts that they can send you that work fantastically as well.
Right. That's important to know that some instructors only work with certain ways of charting. Some methods have specific apps for their method. But then other instructors are kind of open to however you want to chart and whatever app you want to use. So that's an important conversation to have, or just, quick question to pose with an instructor when you're looking into a method is, what are my charting options? And just kind of getting to know like what the differences are, and what it would look like. I have another Marquette specific question. Theresa, we're just putting you a lot on the spot here. So the question is, and you've kind of answered this a little bit, I think, but does Marquette default to teaching the monitor only first, or what are the default biomarkers that instructors teach initially with Marquette?
I think this is if somebody doesn't want to do the monitor, if they have curiosities or, preferences going into it, they should talk to their instructor about that before the session. And I think that the delivery is going to be a little bit more personalized for each client, what their reproductive phase is, why they're learning. For example, I don't necessarily teach the mucus protocol to my breastfeeding clients. We typically just go off of the monitor. For regular cycles, if it's a group class, I don't teach mucus because the minority of people don't want to do mucus. If it is an individual class, we do teach the monitor. And then I present the mucus options that say, hey, this is really valuable if you want to learn it. If you're somebody who, hasn't had success with that in the past and you kind of want to go a different direction, we don't need to learn it. But again, I think this is another conversation that is great to have with your instructor. And maybe it's a reason why you choose one instructor over the other. If somebody has a preference for certain biomarkers or expertise with other biomarkers, certain instructors might not work with proof tests or temperatures as much. So if those are biomarkers you want to incorporate, that can be a way that you vet your instructor. But most instructors will teach the monitor protocols. I'll also say that, certain other monitors are coming on the market. So if you're somebody who's interested specifically in the Mira monitor, and you don't want to learn the Clear Blue protocols, maybe that's a way that you vet your instructor. Say, hey, are you familiar with this? Will you teach me this method using this separate monitor? So that would just be a great thing to ask. And I think it's great to do a consult with an instructor before you hire them, just like you would with any other service, to make sure that it is going to be a good fit, kind of answering that other question, but specifically to the biomarkers you want to chart. I think that's a great thing to start off knowing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Theresa. And then Mary, I have a Creighton specific question, and you have spoken a little bit to this, but I know we've had viewers jump on and jump off, so it'd be great to touch on it again. But the question is, how does medical management with Creighton work? Can I go to any Creighton practitioner and they can help me, or do I need to go to a specific Creighton practitioner who is connected to a NAPRO clinic or a NAPRO doctor? It sounds like this person is just kind of wants a little bit of an overview of how that all works.
Yeah, actually, there's kind of two questions being asked there. So yes, all Creighton practitioners are taught the same. We're all trained to identify abnormalities in the chart. So we can start to kind of see some generally after one cycle, but the more cycles we have, the more information that we have, we start to form like a picture. Certain biomarkers, like anytime we see unusual bleeding, that's where we're trained to refer to a medical consultant. NAPRO medical consultants. So you have NAPRO physicians or nurse practitioners can be trained as medical consultants. That's one component. And then you have the surgeons. So there's two different levels of NAPRO doctors here. They're not all, well, the surgeons probably are medical consultants, but they're not all exactly the same. But any Creighton practitioner should have access, or like, you know, especially if you're local, they should know the physicians that are nearby. It just depends on the location. You can do a search. Some practitioners might know more than others, just depending on the location. So, but also most NAPRO technology doctors want to see at least 2 full cycles. So typically the practitioner will tell you, yes, I am going to refer you to a NAPRO doctor. It's up to that client whether or not they want to pursue that. I'm just here to tell you, these are some risk factors I'm seeing. And they'll tell you the right time to go see a doctor and bring the chart.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. So we are going to go ahead and close up this session. Thank you to all of you watching. I hope that you got a lot of information from this session. Thank you, all of you who are here representing your different methods. This was so fabulous, and I really appreciated all of your time.